Welcome everyone to GW4W's Heart-to-Heart conversation on the language of leadership. GW4W, for those that don't know, is dedicated to empowering more healthy female leaders at all levels for a more sustainable world. We are delighted to have an amazing panel of expert speakers on this topic, and I am so pleased that Nancy Board, co-founder and COO of Global Women for Wellbeing, is joining us today to help us facilitate the conversation. And as many of you know, she truly does bring a global voice to this conversation. So welcome. The very first thing that we'd really like to do is have each of our panelists share a little bit about their personal story, why this topic is so important to them. So the first person we're going to have jump in here is my dear friend and just wellness extraordinaire leader, Leslie Ritter, who is a coach, very focused on healthy culture. And before she started her coaching company, she was the wellness director at Eileen Fisher. So Leslie, we'd love to hear your story.
Well, I feel like we're living in such a polarized landscape right now. So this topic really spoke to me about, how are we communicating as leaders, and how does our language reflect the values that we say are part and parcel of our culture, right? Whether that's the greater culture here, particularly here in the States, or corporate organizational culture.
Yeah, well said. And I know this really comes from the heart for so many of us on this topic. And next, here a little bit from Priti Robyn Ross, another friend that I have known had the pleasure really of knowing for many, many moons now. She is expert yoga teacher, has been teaching generations really now, I think, of just extraordinary teachers that have gone out to change the world. And I include myself as one of those. She has done work both at the stock exchange and in hospitals, and has run workshops with Kripalu, for those of you who are familiar with Kripalu, amazing organization, to really help people from all ages, all backgrounds, heal and be well. So Robyn, would love to hear a few words from you.
So I'm so honored to be on this esteemed panel with these women and these forward thinkers, and I'm just so honored, and to bring my aspect of how I see language in the world, especially within corporate cultures. So aside from leading many, many stress management programs, as you know, because you hired me to do many, and going into the cultures of how languaging was such an impact. If somebody said, "Hey, girly," to me while I was leading in the New York Stock Exchange, a very scientific explanation of the nervous system and stress. "Oh, girly, can you," and how my whole being responded to that, and how I had to stay in my center and in my strength and in my confidence. So very much when we were all designing this, bringing each of our personal experiences into this. And for me, it's the level of consciousness and how we can do things consciously and not move into a default language that is maybe culturally derived. So I'm very interested in the awakening in the corporate culture as to the pronouns, the nouns, everything that we utilize, but there's just some sort of, wow, I can be more aware of how I say that so that I have more inclusive languaging. So I'm very excited to see where we go on this. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, pleasure. And yeah, I'm very intrigued by this idea of awakening. It's not a word that we typically use in a corporate environment. And yet I think it's one of those words that definitely needs to be incorporated as we're moving forward here. And our third panelist had the pleasure of meeting, like many people do, through LinkedIn. and got on the phone and found out about her amazing journey. And Beatrix is a transformational coach, and she specializes in leadership development and individual transformation, a theme here among our panelists. She truly brings a global perspective because she grew up in Europe. She then lived and worked in China for 7 years in the corporate environment and now lives in Singapore. She also happens to speak 5 languages. So, so when it comes to language, I would say I think she kind of beats us all, from seeing it from a variety of perspectives here. So with that, we're going to jump into the discussion. And man, this is such an interesting topic. I think, it's difficult because it's such a broad one, but we're going to start from the perspective of, what does the language of leadership in our current culture say about what we value in leadership? So maybe Beatrix, we can have you jump in.
Yes. First of all, I'm really happy to be here. I think there are overall differences between cultures and how leaders are expected to be. But overall, most organizations, independently of industry, will expect a fairly strong leadership. And our words have power and can really influence situations and can create either understanding and connection or confusion and disconnection. So in that sense, I think it's really important to be aware not just of the content of what we say, but also how do we say it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of framing it. Robyn, Leslie, additional comments around that?
Yeah, I agree. And there's what we're experiencing now in our leaders. It feels like we've gone so far in a direction. We were talking about polarity. We've been talking about polarities together, and this idea of masculine and feminine. And I feel like we've moved we're using a lot of war language, a lot of fight language, and I feel like we need to bring a little more balance to that warrior energy that seems to be so prevalent right now. How can we bring a little more compassion and heart into how we are communicating with each other?
Yeah, and even understanding why we tend to value that, particularly through crisis. I think it's something we don't often question.
It seems that we're from the industrial age, where in the eons was, the power of leadership. It was about power within that masculine context. And one of the beautiful things is we have been, the 3 of us, exploring the different spectrums of languaging and how you can get the same result and understanding and connection, as Beatrix so eloquently mentioned, around language, but then utilize the heart space in it, the inclusivity, the connectivity, the valuing of people instead of the pushing of people. And it really feels that balance, the dismantling of the way things were, and how we are going to all stand tonight as leaders for more inclusive languaging so that we can have a more balanced society.
Yeah, I think well said. And I think, again, it's, do we, even in a corporate culture or in the news media, this idea of, do we ever really take the time to think about, what is balance? And are we hearing the same thing? And we go through these workshops and these courses, and too often I don't think there is enough emphasis on the actual words that we're using as we talk to each other, or even understanding and taking the time to recognize the impact, right? We got to get it done. I'm a leader. It's crisis. Let's get things moving. Here's the project, and hey, it's about the corporate bottom line and we've got to make this happen. But clearly being in a crisis place now that is tied to health and well-being. I think, allows us to have an opportunity to open up this conversation in a different way.
Yeah, I was really struck by, Beatrix, you used the word, I think your sentence was, our corporate leaders expect strong leadership. And that's still going through my head thinking, and what does strong mean to us?
Great question.
What does that look like? Yeah.
I think if I may respond to this comment, Nancy, I do think that leaders have to be strong, because leaders show us the way and give us hope even when there is uncertainty. What I find is that there is often an assumption that being strong is exclusive of being caring. And this is where I do not agree. I think we can have strong leaders, we can be strong leaders, and still show our human side, excuse me, and care for others.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. But care and love and compassion in these words still tend to feel very feminine, even for those that are even more aware. And so, the question again comes to me, like, when we are in these professional settings, like, what happens? Like, what happens, and why are we defaulting to these things? And where is some of the ways that when we're in a social interaction in a professional setting, that we can start to think about what those words mean? So, I mean, maybe you have an example or something that's happened in your life that that kind of illustrates that.
Well, what's coming to my mind is just thinking about leaders and mentors that have meant a lot to us, that have really shown us the way, like you were saying, Beatrice, and what qualities do they have? And so often there's a lot of heart there. They may be very strong people, but they give us a feeling that they care about us, that they care about our growth, that they care about who we are, that they want us to succeed, not just for them or for the business, but for us, right? So I always go to that, like, what would Barack Obama say right now? Like, how would he put it? Like, he's a strong leader with a tremendous and brilliant, and comes with a lot of heart as well. So
I just want to share one thing with you. This really brought this up for me. I heard a conversation, again, I made no comment, but somebody in our network was sharing with me, they were talking to somebody, a male out in California, and they asked him, good guy, very good guy, who are you voting for? And again, I don't want to get too political. This is really about the languaging, so I want to be very clear about that. But I found it very interesting that they said, well, I'm going to vote for Trump because he's a regular guy. Which I think is really, again, instead of like reacting to that, like, I think there's an interesting thing about what language gets used and how that language gets used, and then how it gets interpreted, which also I think then bleeds into the whole gender discussion, right? So what do men, or, in general, or maybe men that grew up with a more traditional view of the John Wayne, I'm just going to use it, the John Wayne version of who I'm supposed to be as a man, or much more patriarchal societies. And as women have come into the work, and again, like kind of sticking, so, how do we start to break through that? And how do women as leaders through a gender lens navigate some of that? I think, yeah.
Can I just add? So it really resonates with me as you speak of patriarchy and how it impacts language, and not just language. Well, we use a language, but behind the words we use, what we share with others are values, right? And perceptions, and what we find normal or good and right.
Regular.
Yes. So patriarchy plays an important role. What I see is that all this language, independently of which language we speak, who speaks it, there is often this understanding that there need to be control, competition, which means if I win, you lose. So we rarely have the understanding that both sides can win and be happy with it. And lastly, I think women also perpetuate patriarchy. And that might be hard to take in, but we are part of this system. And we have been raised in patriarchal systems. So we give this, we perpetuate it to our colleagues, to our daughters, to our families. And that has to change in our consciousness of everybody.
Absolutely.
Well said. We've been raised on patriarchy, so no wonder we try to role model that, because we don't have perhaps another model that works for us. So yeah, we model and demonstrate patriarchy a lot. So it's just making that part of our consciousness.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
However, I really do feel that that consciousness is shifting, and
Yes.
and part of it is because of women working and more women getting leadership positions and more women supporting each other and men supporting women to speak our language, right? That isn't necessarily warrior language, even in the boardroom, right? And we don't have to, we're getting that we don't have to take that on, and that what we bring, the attributes and the qualities that we bring as more feminine beings, has enormous value. And we're learning that in research, right? Caring matters in companies, in thriving companies. Compassion is important. Purpose is important. These things that we as women often, innately bring to the table. So I do think there's a shift that's happening. It's taking a long time.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think some of it has come into many aspects of workplace wellness, where they're inviting in people to look at their health and their well-being, which is essentially a more feminine aspect, instead of go through all night, go do. And I agree with everyone that we have grown up in this society and feel sometimes the more we do, the better we're serving and more productive we are, and the more value we have. So it is us right now, even as we speak, energetically breaking that to the extent where we're learning statistically, as Leslie had said, that when an employee feels valued, when an employee feels seen and heard and respected, they produce better. Literally less health care costs, less sick days. So there's literally statistics when an employee feels valued and seen for who they are, their specific special traits are being, and their strengths are being noticed, that they perform better. So we can look at the bottom line that this is literally the way things are statistically also evolving.
Yes.
Yeah. It is challenging right now, because yes, there's been a lot going forward, but I mean, there's also a lot of data right now around how the pandemic is in some ways pushing us backwards. And this is data from the UK, from US, from other parts of the world. It's not just, that truly is a global thing. And I think this is, leaders need to think about that. And this goes back to, do we default, right, to some of these things when we go through crisis? And, GW4W, we brought this up at numerous events now, but I always find it interesting when you bring up the family man versus the working mother conversation. Yeah, and everybody does this, right? Because even in our own heads, we do it. Right? But a working mother can be a female CEO. And a family man, And so it's to your point, it's this stuff that's ingrained in us sometimes that we don't necessarily recognize. I don't know if anybody saw this, but in France, and again, with all this noise, it's kind of hard to see it, but they nationally just increased paternal leave. They just, I mean, and what's it, 28 days now or something? I mean, it's like, it's substantially more than almost anywhere else. But it was interesting because the article, at least the one that I read, I think it was in Euronews, said, great for fathers, but we're going to lose all this money for our businesses. And there's a side of me that went, really? Like, aren't you going to have long-term gains by supporting the entire family unit? And so it's just fascinating about how much we have to call out, in my mind, how much we have to call out some of these, the languaging that gets used. And I'm really curious, Beatrix, too, especially because you've been in China, and what nuances you may or may not have seen there that you can share with us, because I think, though I think some of these issues are truly global. I mean, I think we've heard that. I mean, I know Nancy, in Japan and, going around and having these conversations, but what do multinationals need to know? Like, if they're going to start to address this, if they've got a workforce in China?
Well, China is a very special place. It's they have a very strong culture. They have a long history. Chinese people are very smart, very hardworking, and very proud of their history. So people who want to be managers and leaders in China must adapt. Also today, there is a new generation of younger Chinese who have mostly studied abroad. So they do speak English, sometimes even other Western languages. So they are the best leaders to go back to China because they have this biculture. Foreigners, I think when I was there in the early 2000s, there was still a little bit more openness. Today, if a Westerner wants to go to China, they have to be a lot more China proficient, and not just in terms of the language, but really of the culture and how to work effectively with people in China. There are different understandings of leadership and how a leader is. So first example, very often in China, boss is addressed as boss. So they will not say your first name, but they say Laoban, which is the word for boss. So they address you with your title. It's very important.
And is that true for male and men and women?
Yes. Women tend to work in China. I think that comes mostly through the history of socialism, communism. You can see that in ex-Eastern European countries too, that communism encouraged women to work and have kids at the same time. So in China, actually in Singapore too, it is possible for women to have a career. There is also a different family support system. So both in China and in Singapore, generations will usually live together. And while a working mother is working, it's the grandparents who look after the kids.
Yeah. And that's, wow. I mean, and that is one of the biggest issues right now for Western cultures with COVID, and, impacting women substantially more than their male counterparts. We had she was former HR director from The Gap and Monsanto, and we were talking about this on the Wine and Tea Wednesdays, and she shared that she has friends now that have had to make a decision, your job or your kids. And it's, again, that you would think that we would be further along the path in some of our work cultures, but unfortunately some of this comes up. And I do think, again, it goes back to some of, the perceived language around what roles men and women play both in and out of the workplace. and it's interesting to hear about China or some of the Scandinavian countries that have solved for this. I mean, each in their own cultural way, but, you know, have solved for some of this, and that, you know, we have other countries that are clearly struggling. And, you know,
I think too, there's an aspect of our culture here that's that, you know, I take care of myself, that individual, that John Wayne, you know, the cowboy, the pioneer, you know, I can do this myself. I don't need any help. That, that, you know, that harms us when it comes to the, you know, what about the community, and what about the children in the community? Who cares for the children in the community? I have to take care of my kids, right? And you have to take care of your kids. We don't look at it from beautiful Scandinavian models, right? Where everybody's taking care of everybody's kids.
It takes a village.
Yeah, it takes a village. Exactly. But yeah, childcare. It's huge pre-COVID and during COVID, right?
Right. Which hopefully, you know, now this awakening, this awareness, you know, we can have a little bit more focus on, you know, some of the underlying issues that seem to be really impacting the gender leadership gap. I'm really curious, because I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but this idea of using war metaphors, you know, really the most dramatic ones, but it's true. I mean, we talk about Machiavellian leaders, and I'm not going to say who they are, but yeah, I'd probably put a couple in that category over the course of my career. You know, but always about like the win-lose thing, the win-lose thing. And in the context of where we are in this world with so many challenges around health, environment, just economic disparities, how much of this languaging is really harming us from all of you? I mean, from what you've seen out there, and what are some of the ways that we can start to change that language?
I'll just say a little something, because when you said that aspect, and both of you said in that level of go, do, you know, and in that masculine essence of going and doing and pushing and striving, that war language of like, push through this, that it is definitely taking a toll on our health. And that's very, very clear. And I think the statistics of that will show that in the long run, that I know the level of heart disease has gone up for women. It's the #1 killer for women now. And a lot of it had to do with that sense of, yes, going and pushing and doing in that, you know, competitive way within the workplace, as well as caring for the family and not caring for themselves. You know, in my workshop, Refilling Your Well, is packed because men and women are both exhausted. And the truth is that when this first started, I thought to myself, oh, wow, there'll be a global pause. We'll all stop pushing because we can't go to work, you know, and we'll regroup and reassess and reevaluate what's important in this world. And that was my hope for this pandemic, that we were going to be able to reframe how we consider productivity in this lifetime. And I think to some degree, because we are virtual, there's been less commuting, you know, so there has been, I believe, certain aspects that have created maybe a touch more ease to some degree. Like, the truth is, I have a fancy shirt on and my sweatpants below. So it's like that.
Full disclosure.
Hey, you know what? I love all the, yes, yay.
Yes.
Let's be comfortable. Why do we have to write? Yeah.
Right. So there is a little level of ease, you know, that maybe we can just put a little bit more emphasis on. Like, instead of, I think part of that, when we called awakening, you know, we can call it observational awareness, to just allow ourselves to put our attention, because whatever you put your attention on grows. It's physics, like attracts like. So maybe within the language aspect, we can begin to become aware of the language we're using. For instance, I rarely say I'm busy. I'll say my day is very full, instead of my day is busy. Because energetically, and I think, Leslie, you were speaking about the energetics of busy, I'm busy, creates that nervous system disalignment of the sympathetic drive, as opposed to my day is full, and I'm going to expand to meet the fullness of my day. Maybe that is a more feminine aspect, but there is something in language. You know, the language of saying, and my last point would be, I'm sorry, you know, which is something many women can relate to. Oh, I'm sorry I'm late. I'm sorry I'm late, as opposed to thank you. To change I'm sorry into thank you. And for instance, thank you for waiting for me. You know, just thank you so much for waiting for me. I really appreciate it. Instead of I'm sorry I'm late. So in that respect, the power of language and what we put our attention on, like I'm going to put my attention on this pretty top and the ease of my sweatpants.
Balance in all things.
Right.
Yes.
That was a great point. I would like to add on it, on the language, and that it's not only negative. I find it often quite violent, and most people are shocked when they hear it, like, oh, I'm not violent in my language. But then when I bring up examples, and it's not just men speaking this, what I call violent language, and not just in politics, it's also in business, it's in sport, it's when we speak about illnesses, or even about love, romantic, passionate love. When we consider the war for talent, employees as armies or soldiers, attacking, invading, defeating a disease, bombarding someone with questions, being under fire, defending your argument. You know, all these are words from war and fighting. And they create this negative energy that Priti mentioned with other examples. And that sets then the tone, how we communicate and how we exchange, and whether we build bridges or whether we build walls.
Yeah. No,
And whether we set fear in others,
yes,
or whether we open our hearts and welcome them in, right?
Yes.
It's a choice, and it feels like we're spending so much of our lives right now instilling fear in others purely with our language. Well, with our energy behind it as well.
And the energy, yeah, I was going to say there's a little intent behind some of this, but you know what I always find fascinating when you listen to sports teams, you know, and I watched a lot of football with my dad growing up, I'm just going to tell you, but you'd always hear this, like the guys, we love our coach, never had any, we love our coach. He's great. He was a great leader. He's such a good, love him, you know, and the coach saying, I love my guys. And and I love this, you know, and they do use the word love in that context pretty freely. So it always fascinates me that in a working environment, suddenly, even though they use all these sports metaphors, this is the one that you don't, at least that I haven't seen a whole lot of it translating over in the same kind of way. Like that kind of like passion for the leader and the, you know, and we're all in this. And, you know, although I will say from a wellness perspective, good sports teams also, and I'm just going to use football, sorry guys, but that's, they have a game plan that everybody knows about. They've practiced together. They have coaches. Somebody gets hurt in the field, they come off the field. They get examined. They get taken off the field if something's bad, and they come out after every game and look at it and analyze it so they can go in and play better. wouldn't it be amazing if more companies actually work that way?
Well, they're also aligned to a common purpose, right?
That's what I was going to say, like a unification. They have to be a team. They have to care for each other and work for each other. Yes, Leslie.
Yeah, I think that that there are actually, I think, some positives out of that. And honestly, I do use the phrase about the George Washington style of leadership, because, you know, history tells us that that guy went into battle with his guys, and I know I'm using a war metaphor, but the positive of that was that he stood on the highest point in the battlefield. And so it was, I'm not just going to go onto the field with you, I'm going to take the most risk. Or I'm going to sleep in the snow with you. I'm not going to sleep at the 5-star hotel that's down the road. Not that there was one at that time, but so I don't want to, you know, and I think there's always a danger of doing that too, right? Like, so what are the good pieces of this that have gotten people through very tough times? But then what is this blending of these two things in a way that truly supports not just health and well-being, but thriving. And again, I think, Leslie, it goes back to your sense of, like, because purpose to me is not a gendered word. Is it? I mean, does anybody else feel that? Or
no, it feels like it's in balance, right? It feels like it's an integrated word, right? It's not either or, you know, it just is.
Yeah.
And I was as I was thinking about this today, you know, before this conversation, I was thinking, wow, RBG really embodied integration. You know, she was a fighter when she needed to be. You know, she was really strong and a warrior in a way, you know, for justice. But she was also, she had enormous heart and was, you know, was a real listener, and, you know, had the softer skills very present in who she was as well. You know?
And I think she was a master strategist. I think she was well aware and honed those skills. And I also wanted to say, I know, Nancy, you had shared with me over the weekend, because I know you have friends from around the world, that her model was not just, I mean, there are people from around the world, right, that were reaching out to you.
Oh, absolutely. And Beatrix, you can speak to that. Everybody knew RBG.
Yes.
She was a great role model, I think, for so many women, for so many people around the world. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. And men. I mean, I did hear a little bit of Justice Roberts' eulogy. And again, to me, that little piece about what he admired in her, and exactly what all of you said, and how wonderful to hear from somebody who's viewed as a more conservative male, to get up and really say this with genuine heart. That man was definitely more emotional. And again, ooh, that's not a masculine word, but I thought it was really amazing in the context of where we are right now, for that man to deliver what he said in the way that he said it. And little bit of shining hope in my world today, you know, to see that. And the humanness in him, and the humanness in the relationship that clearly he had with her. But again, thinking about, you know, how that translates into what we bring into the workplace. And can we listen? Sometimes, I don't know. And again, it's just, do we need to learn the other person's language first? Is that, and I'm just asking, because all of you have different experiences as coaches. Is it the goal to do that first? Is it to understand our own language? And do we really understand our own language first? Or like, so where do we start with some of this?
You know, I'm going to put like a say out for, there's something called the honest positive. And I think, Beatrix, also you worked with the nonviolent communication, I think we spoke about. And so I'd love to hear what you have to say about that as well. But there's a sense, there's a beautiful level of communication, which I think that RBG had, it that it was this listening and respect for what other people felt. Like there was a lot of people across the aisle, from what I knew, that she was befriending and still connected to. And I think that inclusivity is a more feminine aspect, taking care of. But one of the things in the Honest Positive, it goes into 3 steps, and it's a really wonderful communication skill. The first one, let's just say your child wants I'll use something really benign. Your child wants ice cream before dinner. Now, you know you're going to say no and tell them why and feel really justified that they're not supposed to have that ice cream. But what you do is the Honest Positive, which is sort of disarming, which you said, like, ice cream. I love ice cream. What's your favorite flavor? Tell me why you love ice cream. So you disarm the other person by not attacking them, but hearing and receiving their desire and what they want. And it's a very simple, maybe strategy. It is a strategy because it is about you getting your needs met, but not in a violent way, but in an inclusive way. So you really want to understand why that child loves ice cream. And then say, I love mocha chip, which I really do. So it's about being really honest. And then you have the communication of honoring their needs and what they see. The caveat is, you don't say, but you can't have that before dinner. You say, at the same time. So it's kind of a fancy but it really works. And you say, at the same time, I'd really love for you to be strong and play basketball and get your muscles strong and have some good dinner to nourish you, So you state your needs, within the respect, and then there's the compromise. So it's like the Honest Positive. There's at the same time stating your needs. So it's not the but, which dismisses them. And then you say your need, and then you say the compromise, which, how about we have a really delicious dinner, and then we'll go out to, I was going to say Carvel's, go out to Carvel's afterwards. And the child and the person whose needs feel so seen and respected, and there's a compromise. And it's a very valuable tool. I use it in business all the time when people ask me to do something that I know I'm not gonna do, but I respect them for asking, see their beauty, see what they want, at the same time, express my needs, and then come to a compromise. And I think that's a really valuable tool.
I think that's amazing. Beatrix, any thoughts about that, or from your?
Yeah, it's so yes, I am a fan of nonviolent communication, which has been created by Marshall Rosenberg, and I love it as an understanding that all humans have the same needs. You can reduce it to 6 to 8 needs depending on which theory you read, that we all need. Obviously, our physical needs satisfied, safety, contribution, self-expression, understanding, love, etc. And if you drill down to these needs, there you can create bridges. So when there is a disagreement, whether it is with your child, your partner, or a colleague, I think it's useful to try to understand, okay, so you want to do that, but that's the strategy to meet the need. What's the need behind? And if you go down to that need level, needs are universal and human, and needs are not attached to one person doing something specific at a given time. So when you go down to the needs, it's much easier to connect, just like Priti said, and find solutions that really work for both parties, or all parts involved.
So I know, Leslie, working in Eileen Fisher, and I think it's a really was and still is a unique working environment. because it was predominantly or is predominantly female. So hearing this, what are some of your thoughts around what you saw over your years there?
Yeah. Well, we were 80% women, and our language was very reflective of that. And for many years, a lot of the more, traditional masculine corporate language was taboo, right? And competition and talking about achieving results and that kind of thing. It was just we were in the flow like the river, and we were flexible and responsive, and we were all about belonging and community and appreciation and empathy, all of these very feminine qualities. And it was very much a part of our language. And we got to a point where we realized that we needed more balance in the way we were working as well. We needed more, perhaps more strategy, right? More big picture thinking, more future thinking, more of those masculine qualities. And so as we started bringing that in, along with more men, it created more balance, and the language reflected that. Strategy was no longer a dirty word, right? So it was a really great experience, a wonderful way of experiencing that, the polarities are not, they just are, right? They're not good and bad. They're not right and wrong. They just are. And we can use them to find our integration and balance and wholeness and acceptance, right, of each other, rather than having it be a battle of either or.
Well, and again, too, I think sometimes that's an interesting conversation. Is it really one side or the other, or is the reality really we're all on a spectrum?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's so easy to sometimes put these conversations in silos. This is masculine, this is feminine, which gets to, so much discussion now in the workplace. We know that there are now people that are non-binary that identify that way, which brings in, a different element. And I think it's really interesting. I think it's going to be very exciting to see how that starts to play out in this language conversation in the workplace. But what are some of your thoughts about how this is influencing that languaging?
I just spoke, so I won't go again, but I have some.
You can. If you've had, I don't know, the only thing I'll share, it's interesting. I personally had somebody on my team, didn't identify as non-binary, but was trans and went through the transition in the workplace. And it was very interesting for me to watch how different people in the organization reacted to that. Mm-hmm. So fascinatingly enough, and again, this was in New York City, so I think you got to put it in the context of where it is as well, that I think some of the leadership and some of the legal team were more concerned and had more apprehension about some of this than, and were worried about how this was going to go across with the clients. Turned out the clients could have cared less. I mean, they really didn't. All they cared about was that this person was an amazing account manager, delivered everything they needed, really took care of them. And so it really didn't make any difference. And it was interesting to see how that energy shifted then with the leadership. Oh, this isn't going to be so scary. I haven't personally worked with anybody in a working environment directly than identified as non-binary. I don't know if anybody has on this panel, and I would love to hear, you know.
I have met just in private context. So that was not a work context. But so I heard from this person a few stories. And so yes, I think language can, again, have a positive impact and include people independently of how they identify, whether it's men or women or something in between, or their totally individual version of expressing themselves. Of course, it also depends on which language you speak. We have mentioned this with Mim earlier. But I think a few very simple things, simple in terms of language, a little bit more difficult in terms of being aware of it while speaking, is to use gender neutral language. So let's say not saying manpower, but employees, of not assuming that certain professions are necessarily done by one gender. So we tend to assume that nurses are always women and doctors are mostly men, just as an example. Saying hi everyone and not addressing the ladies and the gentlemen, really including everyone. Pronouns. If we speak English, I think it's safe to use the they pronoun, even when we speak of, in general, the employees. So when an employee wants to ask this, he can go somewhere. That gives the assumption that we speak of a man. If we say the same sentence with when an employee wants to do this, they can blah, 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 then it includes, well, everyone. And then of course there are titles. So some people want to have specific titles. There is also this gender neutral title of MERX, so MX, and that can define people on the spectrum and according to their individual choice.
And that takes practice, because I think we have to give a little bit of leeway to leaders that are trying, because if you didn't grow up with this and now suddenly you're 40, 50, 60 years old, we just ask, those that are 20 to help with this transition in the workplace, and know that it's not going to be perfect right out of the gate. But I think it goes back to, at all levels, how we listen to each other. And
asking questions. So whether it is with a non-binary person, or let's say a first name that you have trouble pronouncing, people easily feel awkward, and we all know this feeling. And I guess the easiest way to deal with it is to ask, how do I pronounce your name? Or how do I address you correctly? Which pronoun do you want me to use? And I don't think that there is anything offensive in it. It's people usually are happy about the curiosity and that the other person wants to be correct. And that can set a good foundation for the next, the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
I see that as just genuine respect and kindness, and in being intentional. This is also about us. Mim, as you were saying, some people may have a harder time than others because it's new. So many things may seem that way, but the more intentional we are, the more we allow everyone to bring their whole selves to work, to use that expression. So I think it's so necessary. And it's, again, that's another aspect of leadership that I think all of us have tried to emulate. And it's a daily practice. It's just like anything that we try to get better at. We have to be intentional about it as well.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're talking about specifically about, more of the male female, but this does bring up, I was on a conversation, and this gets more to the diversity side of things, but asking people to not use white paper, interestingly enough. And I hadn't really thought about that. And so they're calling them purple papers. And I went, that's kind of cool. I kind of like that. I said, hey, I'm going to work on that. I actually really like that. But it was a new one for me. And it was just, I totally understood why they were saying it, on something I probably wouldn't have really seriously thought about on my, and I'm really bad because I use it all the time. I do. Hey, read our white paper, right? Honestly.
Well, it's so interesting when I think about it. It's like, I'm much more interested in a purple paper than I am in a white paper. Like, that gets me excited, the idea of a purple paper. The white paper, I'm not so sure.
Yes.
I know, ma'am, you get really excited by white paper.
Only because of the context, and as long as it's not more than 10 pages. But
I want to hit for Nancy's point about leadership and holding, a corporation within this context and making it safe for people in the culture to ask the questions. And it's interesting, I was looking up around inclusivity and what would be a checklist for inclusivity, meaning on all spectrums of this. It says train managers and hold them accountable to show that inclusivity is a core competency. So almost like when they were designing what the workplace, that's a core competency. And then it says form an inclusive council with genuine influence and power. So literally create an inclusivity council that has genuine power to influence the culture of a workplace. And this is a very clear action step for a leader to create a council, and where those questions are safe to ask. And I know even I had mentioned to you beforehand that I had met somebody whose gender I was not clear about. And because of this awakening or realizations, or in the cultural aspect of an awareness, I was literally able to say, what pronoun would you like me to use when I'm addressing you? Where normally I would be very uncomfortable for a very long time until I heard somebody else. But because of this conversation, I have goosebumps, because of this conversation, this can create so much more intimacy and value and clarity within the workplace if literally it becomes a core competency for an organization.
I'm going to add 2 more adjectives to that: respect and trust. Respect and trust, because again, respect and trust for me are not gendered words.
Yes.
And it creates that common thing. I will say this with one caveat, coming from the worksite wellness world. I am all in favor of councils and these things, but I think the key thing that you said there is, are they empowered to truly make that change? And I think that one of the major issues, whether we're talking about the gender gap around diversity and inclusion, that now is the time that leaders must hold these, people need to be accountable, and it needs to be measurable change. However you're going to figure out how to measure that, to just say we have this and make it checks box, and look, here's our wellness committee, look, here's our inclusive committee, here, look, here we have this or that. It's time for leaders to step up, because there is a business case for this. This is not just about doing the right thing. It's not just about making sure that you have it from a marketing perspective, because we know that you need to have it from there too. I mean, you're a business, right? You want to show that you're doing this. But we live in social media world. And if it's not for real, it's going to get out pretty darn quickly. And I think that this is a shift on the back end that you're seeing. So if, as a leader, take baby steps first with some of these things and be successful. Because honestly, I think all of us, we've all been around the block here. We've seen when lip service is given to this and what ends up happening. And now people are reimagining work. They're trying to figure out how we're going to fit these pieces together. And so it is an opportunity to include these these questions about what language are we, what are we using? How are we training our leaders and our managers? You know, what are our core values here in this organization, and how do we express those? Is it in a healthy way? Is it in an inclusive way? And, you know, I hate to say this because our time is up and this is such a rich topic, but rest assured, we are going to have Language of Leadership 2. We want to acknowledge, as we do, that no, we don't have any diversity sitting on this panel. We have diversity in some ways, in terms of professions and who we've worked with and ages and where we live and all of those things. But we, you know, we always want to honor voices. So round 2, we're gonna be including this with a little bit more of our leaders that from other diversity backgrounds, and get to hear a little bit what they have to say too. But what a rich conversation. Just so deeply grateful to all of you for sharing your wisdom, your stories, your thoughts, and for being part of the GW4W family. We can make positive change. You know, as we mentioned many times, seeing the example of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what an incredible, incredible female leader she was, how gracious and kind and powerful she was. May we all channel a little bit of her going forward. So thank you. Thank you for everyone who tuned in today. Please reach out to us with additional questions if you have any. And we want to let you know that the next heart-to-heart conversation is going to be with our young leaders. So some of these leaders are 15, and boy, do they have some amazing voice around what they want to see and how they want to lead. And we are excited to get their voice out to our bigger community. They are truly inspirational. So thank you. Be well. Please connect with us on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Heart to Heart. Be well.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Nancy.